Welcome to another edition of California Triathlon Soup. California Triathlon Soup is a podcast. It's two parts triathlon, it's one part culture, and a dash of silly. And today we have Gary Roethenbaugh, Managing Director of Multisport Research, hailing from the United Kingdom. Welcome, Gary.
Hi Tom, how you doing?
I'm good. Can I say United Kingdom, or is this with Brexit? Is this you're in England? How's this work for all of us Americans?
Yeah, we still say UK. We still say UK. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, we are very fortunate to have Gary on today. Gary does a lot of research in the space of endurance and multi-sport and triathlon, and has done a lot of research. And we are fortunate to kind of pick his brain today and find out he has a new research study that just got released, and we wanted to hear all about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to talking.
So we're going to cover that and then get a little bit into the UK market of how things are done endurance and triathlon in the United Kingdom. Maybe cover a little bit of our our news, latest news, Caltri events, California Triathlon news in the United States, and it'll be the hopefully the fastest 45 minutes that you guys have this week. So, Gary, why don't we start with some of your research that you just got back? I think you had, was it 5,000 folks respond?
Yeah, we had around 4,000. So yeah, in total it was around about 4,300. That's in most international markets. So we targeted the UK, the USA, and a number of other countries like Germany and so on. So yeah, in total it was 4,340 off the top of my head, and in the US we had around about just over 1,000 respondents.
And what mainly was the purpose of the research? Who were the targets, and what kind of questions were you trying to get answered?
Yeah, so we were targeting endurance sports athletes. So the focus is really about understanding their motivations during the current COVID-19 pandemic. And we did this pro bono, so we didn't actually charge for this research. We thought it was important to support the industry. So we work with, various trade organizations, also with events and brands. And we were getting questions, a few weeks back or certainly back in March, around what's going on, what's the consumer sentiment. So we thought it'd be a good time to put a survey out. So we closed the survey last week, and it basically covers a snapshot, if you like, of the sentiment that athletes have in April. And we'll probably then look to repeat the research sometime in June. That's the plan. And, so we'll be partnering with race directors and brands and governing bodies to get the word out on the survey and just sort of see if the mood has changed at all in June compared to April.
And so you're some of the key takeaways from this research. Do you have a top line on that, or
Yeah, well, there
already?
are always with these things. There are lots because we asked lots of questions. So we were asking around participation. We were looking at, has there been an increase or decrease in activity, areas of concern that athletes might have, and so on. I suppose in terms of the takeouts, it it does look like for endurance athletes on average. And when we look at the US, we look at the international countries, and we look at the UK separately, it does appear that due to social distancing and lockdown, there's actually been a slight drop in outdoor activities. And we would probably expect that anyway. I think the thing that was quite interesting was that when we looked at indoor, given that gyms have closed, I suppose that's the primary reason, that actually overall indoor activities haven't spiked, although triathletes and cyclists have certainly shifted to indoor cycling. So those would probably be the top line, and obviously tons of other data points we can kind of chat through as well.
Well, to that point, virtual reality, when you've already made good reference to COVID, and we're only 4 minutes in, so that is not a new record, but we're early, so we're going for it. So virtual reality. So March 13th here in the U.S., the or maybe March 15th, the CDC came out and said 8 weeks, and that sort of was a definitive time frame. And the next thing you know, the emails started lighting up and the phone started lighting up. Everything needs to shift to virtual. And as you know, our races and activities and things like that. And we just, we as an organization just didn't get the vibe. We're trying to build community, and it just seems like a pretty uh, lame experience to get a digital award for doing, basically what a training session, or, in some cases to get a medal and a shirt mailed to your house. And it just left us feeling a bit flat. But other companies have been out there doing virtual. Do you have any insight on how that's going?
At this stage, I think it's probably early days. I mean, from the survey looking at the April data, 38% of those athletes in the US said that they are currently participating in some form of virtual racing. So that might be virtual cycling on Zwift. We didn't distinguish for the first survey, and of course that might be a virtual 5K or another event. Of those who are not racing virtually, I think it was around about 24%, around about a quarter, said that they plan to do so in the near future. I think that your point about virtual is a really interesting one, because is it a lame experience or is it at least an experience? And I think that really it comes back to how you actually activate virtual. I think that in those early weeks in March, it did seem to me like a lot of virtual was being a bit rushed out, and we're doing a virtual race, and sign up. And I think that's great, because obviously you're providing some engagement with your athletes. But I think that these things need to be activated really, really well. And as long as that's the case, and the athlete buys into it, then it's just another choice that you can offer to the athlete, particularly if you had to cancel your race. So if you got a race coming up in May or June, you clearly had to cancel. You had a choice then as to what you offered that athlete. And I think that virtual is just one part of the offering.
So so today we're recording this on May 6th of 2020. And yesterday you did the endurance business.com, you did a article on Ironman's virtual business over the first 5 events. And those numbers are published in there. And you've gone where they started at, say, 7,000 finishers and went up to 20,000. And then subsequently, the fourth and fifth have gone down to 14,000 and then 8,000. Is that an instance of I tried it and didn't like it? Or is that an instance of, what is that? Why would you think, maybe not in this case, but why would you think that the numbers have gone down almost to where they started?
Yeah, I mean, they are, to be fair to them, I mean, they are up a bit on the first race. So yeah, the VR1 race was like just shy of 6,700 finishers. And the latest race, as you say, the fifth race is 8,200 finishers. But you're absolutely right. The intervening races pushed up to, I think it was the VR3 race pushed up to over 20,000 finishers. So the last couple of races, there's definitely been a drop off in the number of registered athletes and the number of finishers. Now that could be, as you say, a bit of fatigue with the experience. People don't necessarily want to race every week, because obviously bear in mind these are weekly races. So as momentum builds, you would hope that the finisher numbers, somebody who maybe did a VR2 race comes back in and does VR7, someone who does VR3 comes in and does VR8, and so on. So you probably have that coming into play. I think the other thing is that on the Ironman Virtual Club, they do have other training sessions and initiatives. You can train with I think Mark Allen, or you can do a workout that has been bought by one of the the Ironman brand sponsors. So it could be there's a bit more choice within the platform itself, and that has brought about a bit of erosion in the VR series of racing. But I think that the other thing to bear in mind is, in a coronavirus respiratory disease situation, we've got to be really taking care of ourselves and not overstressing ourselves. So maybe athletes are thinking, I'll give this a go, but I won't be doing it every single week.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, my understanding is it's a free experience.
It's free.
So
Yeah, yeah.
if it keeps folks healthy and engaged, fantastic. I'm still trying to figure out the difference between, hey, I just trained today and I went out and biked, either with my trainer outdoor 25 miles and ran 10K, and that was called training. But if I upload the same information, that was a race. So I don't know the difference, but that's what I guess we'll figure out if the virtual thing
Well, I think
does take off.
the other thing with virtual that's obviously that every single virtual cycling platform struggles with is accuracy. And and I'm not saying that there are thousands of cheaters out there, but it is very easy to put in a different weight. You're whacking out the same number of watts, but you drop your weight 10 kilos or whatever it might be. I think that um, is open to opportunity for those who are a bit less scrupulous, perhaps. And that might put people off if they're just seeing that an age grouper who doesn't normally place that well is placing up there with the pros. That obviously would cast a bit of a shadow. I think, in fact, Ironman's already announced that they're looking into that as well. And Zwift and other platforms aren't immune to that either. It is something that the virtual racing and the esports side of things has to be quite careful of, I think, in order, if you're going to have credibility in those race results, you've got to have people who are putting in factual information, certainly in terms of their body weight, because it makes a big difference when you're on the bike, of course.
That's a good point, and I'll say this: my Wahoo kicker, I maybe I'm wrong, but I'll put out data when I'm riding down the road and, hey, I'm going X amount, and then I'm on my kicker and I'm putting out about the same watts, and it's 2 or 3 miles an hour slower, just based on calibration. I do the calibration again and again, and it never seems to work. And honestly, I don't care. As long as I'm putting out the work, I don't care. My guess is that that's also the case on the other side. So if I remember looking at some of the early results and talking to friends about that kind of thing, you'd have an age grouper doing a 150 something 56-mile bike,
Yeah,
and no, we're probably not the case. And it might just be just electronic calibration. It might not be anybody doing anything unscrupulous, like changing their weight or having their friend jump on the bike. My guess is, as long as the prizes for these virtual races are virtual or nominal, the reason to cheat is pretty low. But if they start offering, cash prizes or slots in important races, then I think it's going to be rife with cheating, especially in the days where, like if you think about, all the blood doping testing, how many folks are going to be willing to go to a house to catch an age grouper? I mean, where does that money even come from to
yeah, yeah,
pay for that type of protocol?
yeah, totally.
So it'll be interesting. I'm glad we talked about virtual reality racing today. That's fantastic. The Now, in the real world side of the racing, we've been looking at how different race companies are handling the changes. Rescheduling, postponement, deferrals. There's a gentleman that I know in England who works for a large insurance company, and he says, from a macro point of view, that if COVID insurance was included in all these insurance claims, it would eat up the entire industry. And
I can believe
so
that.
you look at Challenge Roth, and you look at, they had refunded, I think, all the monies from this year's canceled event, minus maybe the processing fee. Don't quote me on that one, which I thought was, incredibly generous. Then you have a race like I think Velo Midlands in the UK, where in March they canceled a June race and said, "Well, sorry, we spent all your money, and everything's been spent, and good luck." What have you been seeing in terms of how races are handling refunds, transfers, and deferrals? And potentially, what would you say that would mean relative to their brand or future brand?
I think well, you hit the nail on the head with some two great examples. I think that really just summarizes how disparate and different the response has been. I think it's obviously very hard for a race organizer, particularly if you've got an event. Race day is looming and this has happened. That's really really hard because you've spent a ton of money. I think the issue, you cite Velo Midlands and Birmingham. There've been a few other races in the UK when there's been a bit of a backlash from athletes. I think the thing that saddened me is when I read a lot of Facebook comments on some of these event pages, it got really nasty. And so, regardless of what you think about what the race director's done, I just don't really feel that it's appropriate to be so nasty and spiteful as people can be on social. But that aside, people get angry when they feel their money's been taken away from them, and you can kind of look at it from both sides of the coin, if you like. So Challenge Roth, as you say, they offered up refunds, and then they had this choice for athletes to kind of donate back and support the event in order that the event can continue going forwards. Because clearly, if you think about it, it's one of the biggest triathlons in the world. I think it is the biggest long course race in the world in terms of participants and spectators. I've had the pleasure of being in Roth, and it is just truly, spine tingling what experience that they actually put on for athletes. So, in order to obviously protect the long term survival of their brand, they asked athletes to support the event back, and I think a large number of athletes did do that. The thing that the research is saying, and we keep coming back to this, is the choice for the athlete has to be there. So most athletes will recognize the challenging situation that an event owner is in. And at the same time, they also have their own financial difficulties. An individual might be furloughed. They might need every penny they can get. And if you're doing a big long course race, obviously that's like several hundred or $1,000 plus dollars. So that's a big deal to somebody's cash flow. I think the options could be donating to charity. It could be virtual, as we've discussed. I think what the mood from athletes seems to be as long as you give us a choice, we will then make the call. For those races that don't give a choice and just say, look, we've spent your money, you can have nothing back, or you can have a small proportion back. Clearly, that's when it's going to flare up. And there's talk of class action lawsuits and all of those kinds of things. So I think, as with anything, you look at your brand and you say to yourself, well, how do I engage with my athletes currently? Am I going to surprise them? What do my terms and conditions say? Clearly, you should not be changing those terms and conditions. That's happened. That's been put out there on social, where race directors actually change the terms and conditions after coronavirus and after they've decided that they're not going to give full refunds. So there have been lots of examples, some really, really good. And I think Challenge have done a really, really good job with it, and others less so. The future of the event will be determined by the attitude of the event's athletes at the end of the day. And if an athlete, I'm sure with your athletes, if they feel that they're being supported by you, if you're giving them the choice that they can make their own decision, and also as long as there is enough choice for them to decide what they're going to do, then ultimately they'll support you going forwards.
Yeah, we had as a data point, we had for our events, or so for CalTri events, we had made the acquisition of some of the events on the East Coast, Charlottesville Multisport events, and we still had some events on the West Coast. And so in March, we had to decide, and we canceled 3 events and postponed one,
Right.
and so rescheduled one. And with those events, the 3 canceled events, athletes got their dollars, their fee back, plus the run sign up fee, plus the registration run sign up fee, and then we also did best effort to get in touch with them and give them an update of your fees on the way, and look for it on your credit card, and made a phone call to each one of those athletes, and
Right.
they appreciated it. We probably had 4 or 5 folks who were a little salty didn't like the change. And in some cases, which I think when you're talking five, when you're talking, thousands and tens of thousands of people, that's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, there's always going to be those things. We had one where when we found out on the 15th, we went back to one of our municipalities for a rescheduled event and got a new date within 24 hours. So we moved our Lake Monticello event from May 3rd this last weekend, which was gorgeous, by the way. It's beautiful all weekend, and I had a stinky face. And then it's going to September 13th. And there was, one gentleman on social media who was very confused that we could get an event so early, within 24 hours, and, sort of questioned that and said, we knew back in, well beyond. And it was like, no, we actually did. We worked with our municipality and got that new date. So I would say, as things go, we haven't had, the litany of emails and phone calls and all those things. And, building trust is really important. And hopefully that'll pay off moving forward. So it's interesting. Like for me, it was interesting to see the pivot from, in particular, Ironman. It was to see the pivot from the social media of, please give me an update on a race. Is it happening? What are my options? And potentially, they get caught up in just too many people trying to get information, and at the same time then pushing out a new product like virtual reality. So kind of like talking past the customer and saying, I know I don't have time to answer that question, but would you be interested in this new product I have? and and that's a really tough space to be in. So I'm not worried about that. I mean, I figure at some point, the company you're doing business with, in all cases, and if you appreciate the way they treated you during hard times, continue doing business with them. If you didn't, well, that's up to you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. We don't forget things as consumers, do we? At the end of the day, I think that as long as you do right by people and you give them the right choices, then I think that you should be okay. I mean, I suppose the challenge for any organisation in this, and the word unprecedented has been used so much, but it really is how you fund keeping the machine going, because cash flow is going to be hit so badly. Personally, household cash flow is going to be hit, businesses cash flow is going to be hit. We haven't really even considered the economic impact of this pandemic. That's going to obviously start playing out in the back end of this year and into next year. It is so uncertain. But at the end of the day, I think within the world that we operate, and obviously we do a lot of work with events and with brands and with coaching firms and so on. Ultimately, you're selling experiences, or you're providing us an experiential service, and people at this moment in time do want those experiences. I think that they are keen to embrace life, particularly when you've been looking at your own mortality a bit. I think that endurance sports should flourish, but obviously they've got to do so safely. I mean, that's the key thing, isn't it?
And to that point, companies, what's the damage going to be? We have been, over the last month and a half, I would say it's slowed down a little bit, but every few days there's a race company that gets in touch and is interested in exiting the business. Too much risk, not enough reward. And we had Shannon Couric from HFP Racing on the other day in a podcast we just dropped a day ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been in the business in Ohio for 32 years, and he and his wife are looking at this as saying, yeah, this might be a good time to sell and get more into the race production support business, which they've already been doing. That is not the only company that's happening to. So when this is all said and done, if you start looking at the timing companies, the race registration companies, the race directors, the national governing bodies, they are going to be, there's going to be a lot less of them at the back end. And in the U.S., I think USA Cycling had to either furlough or lay off 40% of their staff. USA Rugby, which had actually, I think, gone bankrupt, probably were on that way before that. So the governing bodies are definitely struggling, and I'll be interested to see what the ecosystem looks like at the end of this thing.
Yeah, it's going to look very, very different. You're absolutely right. It's going to look very, very different, and it is a shame that businesses will exit. I think that for those individuals who've made a living, out of their passion, they're obviously clearly passionate about what they do. For the athletes that do those races, or for a brand or any other business that falls down during this, I think it is tremendously sad. I think one thing, I suppose, generally longevity counts for you. So with Shannon, as you say, 30 plus years doing this, I think maybe it just got to the point of fatigue as much as anything. I'm sure that was one of the factors. You think, oh well, let's maybe do something different. Let's do something that we enjoy. This shouldn't. It's nobody minds hard work, but it's got to be work that you feel is worthwhile in the long run, I suppose.
One area that is interesting, at least this is just ad hoc information, but it seems like the local bike shop businesses are doing very well in terms of, when I do channel checks, the number of folks that are getting maybe families or a lot of service. There's a lot of service being done to get the old bike out, wipe off the dust, and there's in some cases week backlog at the local bike shop. So it looks like this has actually been a fairly nice opportunity for local bike shops. Who would have thought?
Yeah, which is fantastic, isn't it? Because the local bike store has been struggling for many, many years, and I think that is really, really great news. And hopefully, I suppose, if you think about what the pandemic has happened in most countries, apart from obviously like Italy and Spain during the early part of their lockdown, where you literally couldn't go out the door to exercise. Here in the UK, at least we're able to do that, and I think in most countries where you're able to go out the door, exercise, your once a day or whatever your municipality says that you can do, that should be bringing more people into some form of physical activity. Running seems to be ever more popular. So I see countless people out running now, and likewise, as you say, cycling. And whether that translates into events down the line, obviously, will remain to be seen. But I think that it is one of the very few positives that we're getting out of this awful experience.
Gary, the last question that I have on this topic is an obvious one. So, based on your research, you absolutely guarantee there's going to be racing back in 2020. Is that the headline from this podcast?
I guarantee. No, I don't. I don't guarantee that, and the research doesn't guarantee that either. The research is basically saying that most people are uncertain. It's not surprising. What we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier on, we're going to look at doing this again in June, just to see what the expectations are about athletes and when they expect to race. I think it's around about a fifth of respondents will aim to race as soon as restrictions are lifted, and just over a quarter are unsure but expecting September to October 2020. For me personally, I think that there are some fundamental challenges in any race getting back this year. For triathlon, there isn't enough time for athletes to get in the pool and train before a race. So if you put a race on in September or maybe August, you need the pools open for a good few weeks beforehand to enable those individuals to train. That's just from a safety perspective, if nothing else, as well as an athlete experience point of view. And
you mean all these sweet dryland workouts that we see on Facebook?
Yeah.
That's not going to cut it.
Yeah, or not even in your paddling pool in the back of your garden. I actually don't believe that can cut it either. So honestly, I think that I wouldn't say the industry's been deluded. Some of the athletes actually in the survey. So went through all of the responses, and there were quite a few athletes who were saying, I respect the individual's choice. So if their friend wants to go and race this year, then that's fine. But they're making the call that they've decided they're not going to race. So most of their training is zone 1 and 2. They're ticking over their training for health and fitness perspectives, but they're not really doing so for racing immediately because they're realizing that they're not going to be racing early summer. Back end of the summer, maybe. But I think that it all comes down to what happens with the curve on the virus itself. Clearly, bars, restaurants, mass participation events are kind of grouped together in some respect because once restrictions lifted on a bar and a restaurant and it's safe, then we can presume that an event with 100 plus people would be okay to go ahead. But I think that until that point, in terms of restrictions, and some would actually argue until a vaccine is in place, the endurance sport world is going to look, very different and very sparse. But I mean, as you know, a lot of races are just pushing into the final quarter of this year, and because everybody's doing it individually, it's going to be a really messy calendar at the back end of the year. So we've got some really key races where there is still a question mark. There's still a question mark. I think it was the French health minister said yesterday that not quite sure if the tour will go ahead in the back end of August. Clearly, ASO and many of us, me myself as a cycling fan, I'd love to see the tour go ahead, but it's got to do so safely. And the same could be said for Kona, and a number of other really big iconic races. You really, really feel for the organisers. Everyone wants them to go ahead, but they've got to go ahead safely, and people got to be also got to be able to get to the race as well.
And the one item that we haven't talked about yet, and I believe it'll be critical to the success of the race because it always is volunteers.
Yeah.
And the willingness of somebody to go out when they're not, getting a great workout in, but to support a race. And so we have a volunteer one, get one program. So if you go to any of our races or partner races,
yeah,
and you volunteer at one race, you can get a free race. And so we as an incentive to do that, but we're going to have to beat the drum pretty hard to get volunteers because it's one of those things where you might just stay in bed. So we're going to recommend to all of our athletes, when you're putting your fall schedule together, volunteer for 3, race for 3, volunteer for 1. Make sure you put volunteering in your calendar. Yeah. Because without volunteers, you really can't have these races.
Yeah, I suppose the other question is what's the demographic of your volunteers as well? Because as you say, you've got those looking at it as a volunteer, buy one volunteer, get one race entry free, which is obviously a great, and Roth is a good example of that, where it's so difficult to get a race slot that people volunteer, and in order they can get a slot for the subsequent year. But if you think about it, a lot of the other aspects of volunteers is that, you might have somebody who's not racing so much anymore, maybe, in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe feeling they're more at risk and maybe even less inclined to go out and volunteer. So I think you're absolutely right. The volunteering piece is going to be a very big challenge as well.
Well, we really, I really appreciate you fully covering all that good stuff. Hey, when you raced Roth,
I didn't
brag
actually
a little bit.
I was a spectator. I'm sad to say I was a spectator. There was a conference there. So I've been to Roth, I've seen the expo, but I didn't race, and I really wished it was one of those races where you're there, you think, I really want to do this. Obviously,
you're now 50 years old.
I am 50 years old. Yes.
And isn't it time to kind of think about that as a midlife crisis event or something, a bucket list? What do you think?
Yeah, if I could get a slot, maybe. I don't know that my family would be too happy. Having done long course racing before, one gets a bit obsessed. But yeah, as an experience, it would be something else, definitely.
So are you so on the non-triathlon side, what have you been doing to keep from going a little bit cuckoo?
So are you talking about in terms of work or just in terms of life now? Is this
hopefully not work, hopefully life, yes.
Is this the cultural and fun bit you mentioned at the
beginning? We have to, by legally we're required to care about what you do. Yeah, like we really do, honestly.
Okay. I do ride a lot. I ride a lot, which kind of keeps me sane, although I've been riding a lot indoors, which is making me a little bit insane. So I am going to venture out on my bike outdoors this coming weekend because we've got a bank holiday weekend, because I've been outdoors for weeks. And I'll take I'll go a short route. Other things I do, I obviously, because I'm working in the cycling industry as well, it's not really that healthy to have a hobby that's directly related to what your work is. So I make beer. I really got into doing that. That's a really cool thing. And then it's the usual, we can have conversations about what we watch on Netflix, if you like, as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm more interested in the beer part.
Yeah.
So you make beer. How much? I mean, do you have like a still in the bottom of your house? Are you putting out thousands of gallons, or are we
No,
just
it's
talking a
not. I'm
couple?
doing smaller batches now, so I'm kind of really early doors with it. So I had this idea that, because like of my few passions, so there's basically sport, there's alcohol, and there's music. Would probably be my three main passions, aside from obviously my family. I kind of felt it'd be nice to have some hobbies that related to that. So I cannot play a musical instrument to save my life, although I love going to see live music. So the idea with the beer is I do a batch, and then I name it after an obscure song. So the first batch was called "Totally Wired" by a band called, probably may have not heard of them, called The Fall, who are like a Manchester sort of post punk band. And then I have a lyric from the song on the side of the bottle, and I make a label up, and then I give the beer away to my friends, basically. So yeah, each batch is a song title.
Well, that's fantastic. So you pick. So when you're thinking of your Manchester bands, you are there any other good any Manchester bands we would know off the
Oh,
record?
well, I'm a big fan of. I mean, I'm obviously not from Manchester myself. I mean, I'm from the southeast, so there are lots of them. I mean, in terms of bands, I mean, I grew up as a student with like the whole Manchester scene, which was the sort of post, was sort of pseudo acid house time. So it's late '80s, early '90s. That's when I was a student. So you had bands like the Happy Mondays. You had the Stone Roses, and that's those sorts of bands. Have you probably heard of those guys? Would you have heard of those or not?
I haven't. I mean, I wish I had, but I'm thinking more like maybe a favorite Liverpool band. Is like the Beatles. That's
Beatles were pretty
probably as
good,
far
weren't
as it goes.
they? The Beatles are
So, like,
great.
do you have like a Sergeant Pepper beer
Oh
or
no,
something?
no, I should probably do a Revolver beer or something from Revolver. That's my favorite album, I think. Uh,
Okay. Well, we no, we have been doing a lot of we actually live on a college campus. I've told you that before, and
yeah, yeah,
we've been doing a lot of nesting things like cleaning up old photos and video and putting them on Amazon and getting all these different boxes which you never get to sorted out, and it's getting quite desperate. And the other day we had a hey, let's get all of our passports together and birth certificates and marriage certificates and the will updated and all this other stuff. And my daughter goes to the desk in the main desk and opens up the green tin, the safety deposit box, looking through. And besides those things, there's the cash in 5 or 6 different denominations, the Glock, and of course German bearer bonds. And so honestly, we're ready if anything happens. We're just ready.
yeah. Well,
So
yeah, yeah. Come the apocalypse. Zombie apocalypse is coming, maybe.
but it is one of those things where we were really happy to take things that were on 3.5, even things like my daughter had never seen what's a 3.5 inch drive or a 5 1/4. And in our house we have one optical drive yet left, and eventually that we won't have anything to be able to pull that stuff in. And sending out in the US, we had VHS tapes and of big events and sent those out to a service. And
Yeah,
just basically use the time to digitize all these great memories. So it's been a great opportunity to go through and look backward and be thankful for all the things we have. And so that's really what we've done. And it's one of those things as well from a training point of view. Definitely have been training, because if you come to the end of this and you're going to want to run out the door and get on your bike or run it, you want to be fit.
Yeah,
And so I
yeah,
hope people are using this opportunity to invest in themselves. And I think that's my one takeaway is you might not be able to see your friends as much, but at least you can invest in yourself.
yeah, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's going to be fascinating to see what the psychology is from all of this. What people's behaviours will be. You know what it's like. You go for a walk now, you get your half an hour, hours, exercise and sunshine or whatever it is, and people really do keep their distance. There's a kind of cautious smile with the strangers you walk past them, but our interaction as humans is changing a bit, and I hope that we can get back to being a bit more cuddly. Maybe that would be nice, perhaps.
Well, Gary, you have inspired me. This call has inspired me. A few years ago, I decided I'm going to stick and do short course, and I've been looking at Roth for a long time, and I just said, that's a lot of effort, and so you have inspired me that if you decide that you will do Roth, I will also do Roth.
Well, did I tell you before? My wife said that she would leave me if I did another Ironman. But I know
Um,
it's obviously not an Ironman brand, but she's not that stupid. She'd realise it's a long course race. So
yeah, it's just a long course race. It's not really. I mean, I've done a few. I've done, I don't know, 5 of these, and it does take a lot of time. But I've always been one of those that said, if I have to be out an extra 5 hours a week for 10 minutes in the time, that's not worth it.
yeah,
So you can do it. I see, there's 17, 18 hours out there. That's a very leisurely swim. It's a century ride. It's a little more than a century ride. And, if you've been out there late night on a course, there's not a lot of running going on. So
yeah.
the worst comes
Yeah.
to worst, it's a 26-mile walk.
So is this what you're saying? You're throwing down the gauntlet to see who can do the crappiest time at Roth? Is that
Well, I'm 50. How old are you?
I'm 50?
Hmm.
two
So
two follically challenged men who are desperate to prove that they can go slower than the other one. I like that. That's my kind of challenge.
and I believe there should be some craft beer at the end of it.
Well, indeed. We'll come up with a song title bash.
Okay, so is this? We'll have to figure out 2021 or 2022 Roth. Let's at least think about how awesome athletes we were back in the day.
Yeah, indeed. Let's do that.
Gary, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank. This was Gary Roethenbaugh, managing director of Multisport Research, and really somebody to go to, at least when we're looking to get market information. Very thoughtful about how he views things, and an asset to our sport, endurance sports. And we just want to thank you so much for sharing some of your time and wisdom, and with our 7 to 10 followers.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Always a pleasure, Tom.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Take care. Cheers.